Hello, and now I'm going to be baking shortcakes. These shortcakes come from the Good Housewife's Handmaide, which was published in 1594. Now, I believe that the shortcake recipe actually helped inspire the fine sugar cakes that appeared in John Murrell's book in 1615, and I think the fine sugar cakes inspired the Shrewsbury cakes that we then see in, I believe it's 1658 and 1721. Now, all four of these recipes have similarities and differences. All four have sugar, flour, and egg. Now, the 1594 and the 1617 recipe both include cream. The later two, the 1658 and the 1721 recipes, include butter instead of cream. The 1594 recipe includes, it's clove and mace. The 1617 recipe is pepper and nutmeg. The 1658 one actually has ginger, but then in the 1721 recipe, it goes back to mace, the same as the 1594 recipe. Now, as far as Shrewsbury cakes, the first mention of Shrewsbury cakes appears in 1561. By 1596, these cakes were very popular and associated with Shrewsbury. In fact, in 1602, Lord Herbert of Shrewsbury wrote to his guardian specifically referencing these cakes. Now, since the 1617 recipe has more measurements to it, rather than the 1594 recipe that just says to add flour, add sugar, but doesn't give measurements, I'm going to be using the 1617 recipe as a basis to use for measurements for the 1594 recipe. And now, let's get started with 1594 shortcake recipe. First, I'm going to add in half a cup of sugar and 1/4 of a teaspoon of mace, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground clove, a pinch of saffron, and now I'm going to add in 1 egg yolk, and 2 tablespoons of cream. Now I'm going to stir all of this together before I add in the flour. Now first I'm going to add in 1 cup of flour and then see if I need to add any more or if this will be enough. And this sometimes happens when you're figuring out a recipe. As you can see, I should have added less flour, so it looks like I've doubled up on the flour, so I'm going to double up on the rest of my ingredients. So I'm going to go ahead and add another egg yolk. And that wasn't pretty. And adding more cream. Okay, now that I've added more cream in. Looks like the recipe would normally call for 4 tablespoons rather than 2 tablespoons, but now I've actually got a dough that actually looks like a dough. So now it's time to make my cakes. Now, a period technique would be to melt butter and put that on the tray, but just to make it easier, I've decided to use non-stick cooking spray. And let's see if I can get this to form. It's a bit sticky, as you can see. Wonder if I put maybe a little too much cream in there. Be right back. Okay, well, I ended up adding some more flour, and now I have my dough is less sticky. So now I'm rolling up the cookies. I'm putting them on the cookie sheet. And I've got my oven preheated to 350 degrees. Okay, now I'm putting them in the oven. I've got the oven preheated to 350 degrees, and I'm going to bake them starting off at 7 minutes and see how far we get. Okay, this is after 11 minutes in the oven, and when I lift it up, it's a bit brown on the underside. So once these cool off, I'm going to taste test them, and we'll see how they taste. As I'm putting this next set of dough on the tray, I'm finding that the dough is actually less sticky. It's letting me roll it into a ball easier, and then also to flatten it on the tray. So I would recommend, once you make your dough, to let it sit for a while before making cookies and putting them on the tray. Okay, overall I'd say this was a success. Tastes good, maybe a little heavy on the cloves, so I might need to revisit that, but here we go. Hello, I decided to have another go at the recipe to tweak things a bit, and one of the things from reading the original recipe, it says to bake the flour. Did you know that by baking the flour, you eliminate any bacteria that would be in the flour? Now, this was probably a problem in 1594, enough so that it was written into the recipe, but I don't think it's a problem today, so I'm going to just skip over that step. The recipe also says to use cream, if not cream, to use sweet butter, which is unsalted butter, but that the cream is better. Well, I used up the last of my cream last night working with this recipe, so today I'm going to be using unsalted butter. And here's a fun little bit of trivia. Did you know that the term shortcake actually appears in The Merry Wives of Windsor by William Shakespeare? It's actually part of someone's name, Alice Shortcake. And then this recipe appears. Is that a coincidence? Who knows? Now I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees, and since I've run out of cream, I'm using butter. I'm going to melt 4 tablespoons. Okay, and now I'm going to add in half a cup of sugar, 1/8 of a teaspoon of mace, 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground clove, a pinch of saffron. Now I'm going to work on 1 egg yolk because the actual recipe says the yolk of an egg for 1 dozen of these cakes. So 1 yolk is enough. And there's my yolk. Now I'm going to stir all of these together before I add the flour. And after what happened earlier, I'm only going to add in half a cup now, and then stir it up, and then see if I need any more flour. So if you look, it's mixed together, but it's still pretty moist. I'm going to add in 1/4 a cup more of flour. Okay, now that I've got my dough mixed, time to make the cakes. And if I did this right, I should come up with about 12. I'm going to roll them, going to start off with about meatball size. Roll it up. Actually, I take a little bit off there, make it a little bit smaller. And once I've rolled it, I do want to flatten it a bit, so I'm just pressing down. There's nothing in the recipe that specifically says it needs to be pressed down. That's just personal preference. I may push those down more later. Now, one thing I've done is I've gone ahead and split it up to make sure that these are all about even. The recipe says that it will be short, and so you will only have 12 cakes, which I've got 12 here. Just trying to flatten this one a bit. And I think I said it before, but I've got the oven preheating to 350 degrees, and I'm going to bake these for about 10 minutes. The recipe actually says to bake these on papers, because normally this would be going into a clay or a brick oven, and you would want them to sit on top of something so that way they don't stick to the bottom of the oven. So that's why I'm using the tray. And also in the recipe it says that you would bake these after you bake the bread. So for the clay or brick oven, you would put a fire in it, have the fire going for a couple of hours, and it would be roughly about 400 degrees inside the oven. You bake the bread for about an hour, and then at that point the oven's already started to cool off, so it would be between 350 and 325 degrees depending on your oven. I'm just trying to get the last little bits of dough here. Okay, just flatten these out and then it's time to bake. And here's what they look like after 10 minutes at 350 degrees. And now I'm done. These over here are from last night. That was the first time I tried making this recipe. And these over here are from today. These taste much better. If you remember, these were heavy with the clove flavor. These, the sugar to flour ratio is better, so they're sweet with a hint of spice, but much more pleasing. And these are so good that I've already ate 2 while filming this, so I highly recommend using this recipe, the second one, versus my first go around. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Feel free to subscribe.